And we are live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Async API. So, today we'll be discussing tackling interoperability challenges in open source. And we have our guest today, Dakshita, who will be helping us delve into the topic, and we'll be learning more on how we can tackle these challenges. Dakshita, if you're ready, can I bring you on stage? You can just wave your hand. Okay. Hello, Dakshita. How are you doing?
I'm good, Percy. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
If you don't mind, would you like to tell us about yourself, what you do, a quick bio so that the audience knows you better?
Yeah, so my name is Dakshita Ratnayaka. I am based in Colombo, Sri Lanka. But I'm currently working at a company called Zitadel, which is a
Mm-hmm.
startup behind Zitadel, the open source identity and access management platform. I'm a
Mm-hmm.
developer advocate there. And before I joined Zitadel at the end of last year, I was working for WSO2, which also
Mm-hmm.
produces open source middleware. And I was there for about 12 years and played many roles from software engineer, solutions architect to develop advocate. And I also worked as a program manager for the Ballerina programming language while I
Mm-hmm.
was there. Yeah, so that's pretty much about me.
Oh, awesome. Actually, I'm so excited for today because there's so much that I'm going to learn and I'm sure everyone will learn as well. So let's get right into it. So today we're talking about tackling interoperability in open source. So do you mind telling us what is it exactly? I mean, it's a mouthful of a word. So what is interoperability in open source? How is it involved? Like, do you mind giving us a short definition of that?
Yeah, okay. So interoperability in general, not just in open source,
Mhm,
refers to the ability of different software systems, applications, or components to work together, exchange information, and communicate effectively with each other.
mhm,
Even though they may be developed independently and potentially using different programming languages or
mhm,
technologies or
mhm.
architectures.
Okay.
So actually, interoperability was one of the reasons why people moved to open source,
Mhm,
because in proprietary solutions uh, where the source is closed, interoperability was a challenge. So
mhm,
open source itself was a solution to interoperability. But if you take the open source um, ecosystem, or if you take all the software, open source software, they too are now facing interoperability issues.
mhm,
So interoperability is particularly important in open source software
mhm,
because projects are created, maintained, and
mhm,
contributed to by diverse individuals and organizations
mhm.
around the world.
Okay. So, do you mind explaining why interoperability is important and its impact in open source?
Okay, so I have a few points here. So
Mhm.
interoperability is crucial because that's a lot, okay, in open source development
Mhm,
for several reasons, right? So the first one
mhm,
would be collaboration and knowledge sharing, right? So
mhm,
interoperability basically encourages collaboration among developers, organizations,
mhm,
and communities by allowing them to share, reuse, and build upon each other's work. So this leads to the creation of better or more robust and with lots of features or feature-rich software, and
mhm,
also allows people to communicate their knowledge and their ideas, and so that's the collaboration aspect, right? And
mhm,
the second point would be reduce development time and cost. So when software systems are interoperable, developers can use existing components or libraries rather than building everything from scratch. So this can lead to reduced development time and cost, and obviously improve efficiency. The third point would be innovation. So, interoperability allows or enables the integration of diverse technologies, tools, and
Mhm.
systems, which can lead to innovative solutions and new use cases. So, by making it
Mhm.
easier to combine different components or systems, interoperability can drive uh, the creation of new applications and services. Another
Mhm.
point is scalability and flexibility. So,
Mhm.
if your software is interoperable, that means it generally tends to be more modular and extensible. So, it makes it easier to scale, modify, or extend as needed, right? So,
Okay.
this flexibility allows for more uh, effective adaptation to evolving requirements.
Mhm.
And of course, this is also important, which is vendor neutrality and avoiding lock in.
Mhm.
Right. So, interoperability
Mhm.
ensures that users and developers are not locked into proprietary solutions or dependent on a single vendor. So, this promotes it encourages the development of a diverse ecosystem of software offerings, which benefits
Mhm.
users in terms of choice and flexibility. And of course, uh, when you have interoperable software, there's always broad adoption and compatibility, right? So
Mhm.
interoperable software is more likely to be adopted and used by a wider audience, as it can be easily
Mhm.
integrated with other systems or components. So this adoption can lead to a larger user base, more
Mhm.
contributions, and greater overall success for the project.
Okay. So, like, do you mind giving us like the challenges that people face, like in open source development, especially when it comes to interoperability?
Yeah, okay. So there are a few. And the first one would be a lack of common standards or protocols. I
Mhm.
mean, there are many standards out there now, but um, some challenges still do exist because of uh, some missing standards and protocols. So without widely adopted standards or protocols, achieving interoperability can be difficult because
Mhm.
different systems could be using different communication methods, data formats, or data structures, and so on. And there are like diverse technology stacks, right? So
Mhm.
open source projects often involve people developing their projects using different programming languages or
Mhm.
platforms or architectures, which can complicate the process of integrating them seamlessly, right?
Mhm.
And okay, if you have inconsistent APIs, that means poorly designed or inconsistent APIs can uh, hinder interoperability by making it challenging for developers to understand and interact with the provided interfaces. So if your APIs
Mhm.
are not designed properly, and if there's like if you don't have enough documentation, then that's not going to work. Um,
Mhm.
then there's quality and documentation. These are like uh,
Mhm.
obvious ones. So incomplete or unclear documentation can make it difficult for users or developers to understand how to use or integrate with a particular software component. And additionally, varying code quality can lead to unpredictable behavior or integration difficulties. And
Mhm.
there are also security and privacy concerns as well, right? So
Mhm.
uh, making sure that interoperable systems are secure and maintaining privacy can be a challenge sometimes, especially when you're integrating components from different sources or with varying
Mhm.
levels of trust. And
Okay.
there are people can face legal and licensing issues. So different
Mm-hmm.
open source projects may have different licenses, which can create
Mm-hmm.
limitations when attempting to integrate them. So you need to make sure that, or you have to ensure compliance with various licensing terms to avoid legal issues. Um, So, interoperability often also requires close coordination and collaboration between different project teams. So, this can be challenging if there are no open communication channels, or especially when
Mm-hmm.
developers may be geographically dispersed, or
Okay.
different teams have different priorities or goals or resources. Maybe it's a one-man project who doesn't have enough time to contribute,
Mm-hmm.
or consider someone else's requirements. So then obviously there is that issue with the collaboration aspect there. So complexity and maintainability is also another issue with interoperability, because achieving interoperability can increase the complexity of software systems, making them harder to maintain or troubleshoot or update them. Um, yeah, so these are some of the challenges, interoperability challenges in open source.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you listed a list of challenges that we have like in interoperability. So now let's talk about addressing these challenges, right? So what are the different approaches like people should take like when it comes to tackling interoperability?
Yeah, so this is pretty much, I mean, you can uh, adopt several approaches to tackle
Mm-hmm.
interoperability challenges. And these are these approaches are, I'm sure, widely adopted in the open source community. So the first one
Mm-hmm.
is adopting common standards and protocols. So if in your space, or depending on which industry um, that your software is catering to, you need to embrace those widely recognized standards and protocols, and ensure that different systems can communicate and exchange information seamlessly. So, like I said, that's one of those ways. And you need to design well-defined APIs. So, creating
Mm-hmm.
clear, consistent, and well-documented APIs
Mm-hmm.
basically helps facilitate communication between software components or systems. A well designed API provides developers with a straightforward way to interact with the system, right? Um, Another one that's important is developing middleware and adapters. So
Mm-hmm.
there might be legacy applications that maybe cannot consume APIs, or especially now, for example, if it's a greenfield application where you can like write the application from scratch to use the open source software, then you can easily consume the APIs provided by that open source software. But if it is
Mm-hmm.
a legacy application in a brownfield environment, and there is no way to consume those APIs, then
Mm-hmm.
one thing you can do is develop middleware and adapters, or you can use existing middleware solutions to help bridge the gap between disparate systems by providing a common interface that translates between different protocols, data formats, or architectures. So, this approach can be especially useful, like I said, when integrating systems that were not initially designed to be interoperable. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, also, if you have modular and extensible architectures, then this enables developers to add, replace, or modify components without disrupting the overall functionality. So, this approach
Mm-hmm.
allows or facilitates interoperability by making it easier to integrate different components or systems. So, it could be
Mm-hmm.
making sure that you write your libraries or maybe you can be adopting a microservices architecture. Either way, just
Mm-hmm.
embracing modular and extensible architectures is one of those ways to address interoperability challenges. Another good one way, or another good way of making sure that your systems are interoperable is by improving documentation and code quality. So if you have clear
Mm-hmm.
and comprehensive documentation, um, you can get developers to understand easily how to use and integrate software components or systems effectively.
Mm-hmm.
So also, if you maintain or if you are making sure that the code quality is main, if you're making sure that the code quality is high, um, then you can have you there will be predictable behavior, and that simplifies integration efforts. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so easily understandable API documentations are the most important, actually. So that's an experience that I've had. Um, if like if you can come up with examples for developers to copy and paste them as they are, then
Mm-hmm.
that makes the developer's life easy, right? And
Mm-hmm.
the best designed API that is poorly documented will be a useless
Mm-hmm.
API for the developers.
Yeah, true.
So
Mm-hmm.
so you have to make sure that the information is made available.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to, encourage collaboration and coordination. So if you encourage open communication and collaboration between different project teams, you can address interoperability challenges early in the development process. So
Mm-hmm.
like this might involve creating shared forums, mailing lists, or working groups to discuss and solve interoperability issues. For example,
Mm-hmm.
at Citadel right now, we're using we have a Discord uh, channel, and also GitHub discussions. So like different people
Mm-hmm.
would voice their concerns and express their opinions. It can be something not related to not related at the code level, but it could be a suggestion
Mm-hmm.
based on a future integration that they may foresee and want to have support for. So it's really important to have such communication channels and let people voice their concerns and needs.
Mm-hmm.
So those are some of the ways you can address these challenges. And of course, you have to ensure compliance with various open source licenses. That's also crucial
Mm-hmm.
when integrating components. So maybe you need to seek legal guidance where necessary and make sure you take those things seriously. And focus on security and privacy as well. So, incorporating security and privacy considerations from the outset of a project can help prevent potential legal issues. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so those are some of the ways you can address these challenges.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now we have spoken about addressing challenges. So let's move on like to best practices of overcoming interoperability. So do you mind sharing like some success stories on open source projects that you know that have overcome these kind of challenges or that have overcome interoperability challenges as well?
So I think there are many out there,
Mm-hmm.
many open source projects that have successfully overcome interoperability challenges.
Mm-hmm.
So one famous, obvious example would be Kubernetes, right? So
Mm-hmm.
Kubernetes is a de facto open source container orchestration platform that automates deployment, scaling, and management of your containerized applications. So I would say Kubernetes has as overcome interoperability challenges by
Mm-hmm.
embracing a modular and extensible architecture. They support various container runtimes. They have networking solutions and storage systems. And you can see this clearly because they have established a rich ecosystem of plugins, extensions, and
Mm-hmm.
third-party tools that obviously help enhance its interoperability and allows or enables it to become the de facto standard for container orchestration. And Apache Hadoop is also an example. Uh, so Hadoop is an open source framework for distributed storage and processing of large data sets. So they addressed some interoperability challenges due to diverse ecosystem of tools. They came up with various components like Yarn and HDFS
Mhm.
uh, that provide a unified, extensible platform for running different data processing workloads. So they have a good ecosystem as well, allowing seamless integration with various databases, machine learning libraries, and analytics tools. I would also like to talk a little bit about what we do at Citadel um,
Mhm.
to uh, to address interoperability or make sure that Citadel is interoperable. So our priority right now is making sure that our APIs and API docs are in top shape and that they're well maintained. So all our
Mhm.
GUIs and other product functionality are dependent on the core APIs of user and
Mhm.
access management. So the API, we are basically using our own APIs and making sure that they are in top shape, right? And in terms of standards, we support OIDC and
Mhm.
not just OIDC, but other standards. But we have received uh, like the OIDC. This is something we want to mention. So this we have received the OIDC certification for the Citadel
Mhm.
OIDC Go library, and this proved to be very useful to many Go developers because our OIDC
Mhm.
library can be reused by other projects. And also because, as far as I know, there aren't other Go based OIDC libraries that are certified for OIDC. So these are some of the things
Mhm.
that we are also doing, to make sure that the product is interoperable and widely adopted and is widely adopted.
Okay. All right, so let's bring it home. So, are there some lessons to be learned from failed attempts, especially when it comes to tackling interoperability?
Yeah, so reasons for failed interoperability, it all boils down to the
Mhm.
points I discussed before, right? So, uh,
Mhm.
like projects mostly fail if you don't rely on standards or if the communication is poor
Mhm.
and if you don't have comprehensive documentation. These are like, basic things, but they are very important. Um, so,
Mhm.
so we just talked about how you can tackle interoperability through various means. So those should be followed through. So um, did you ask me for examples as well?
Some lessons. Yes, you can draw some examples as well from those lessons too.
Yeah, so I had to look this up because I was trying to figure out what are some open source
Mhm.
projects that um, failed due to interoperability issues. It's
Mhm.
difficult to pinpoint specific open source projects that have
Mhm.
entirely failed due to interoperability issues, but there
Okay.
have been instances where projects did face significant challenges or setbacks related to interoperability. So something that came up in the news was OpenStack. So
Mhm.
you know that OpenStack is an infrastructure as a service. It's a cloud
Mhm.
computing platform. So they did face interoperability challenges in their early years.
Mhm.
So these issues have come up mostly due to a lack of standardization and consistency across various OpenStack components and implementations. And this had made it difficult for users to deploy and manage their cloud infrastructure properly. So the OpenStack community unified to make substantial efforts to address these challenges. They came up with shared guidelines. So they're basically saying, look, do
Mhm.
it this way. Don't do it the way you would do it. Just make sure
Mhm.
this these set of guidelines are properly followed through. And
Mhm.
they came up with reference architectures, and they also have interoperability test frameworks. And
Mhm.
WebRTC is another open source project that I can mention. WebRTC is Web Real Time Communication. It's an open source project aimed at enabling real time communication capabilities such as voice and video in web browsers and mobile applications. So, so basically, for us to talk right now, you have to make use of a WebRTC. So while WebRTC was successful in many ways, it did face interoperability issues due to inconsistent implementations across different web browsers. Like, especially in
Mm-hmm.
the early days, for example, browsers like Chrome or Firefox,
Mm-hmm.
they implemented WebRTC differently. So this led to issues with cross-browser communication. Yeah, so now they have, not now, I mean, they resolved the issues, and I mean, they came up with ways to overcome these challenges by refining the spec and developing common APIs and so on, and promoting browser compatibility through their
Mm-hmm.
standardization efforts.
Okay. So now we're reaching close to the end of this session, right? So I want you to give us a quick recap and like recommendations to further tackle like interoperability challenges in open source. Yeah, especially when it comes to open source projects.
Yeah, so to recap, it's I would like to mention the points I mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Mm-hmm.
encourage the adoption of widely recognized standards and protocols to ensure that different systems can communicate properly. You should invest time and resources in designing clear, consistent, and well documented APIs, and make sure your documentation is comprehensive, give enough examples, and promote open communication and collaboration between different project teams or stakeholders using, chat or shared forums, mailing lists, working groups to discuss interoperability issues. And also, when it comes to the documentation, um, like be as descriptive as possible. Now, even if it is your uh, you know have a good set of guidelines for contributors, have well documented pull request templates, issue templates, and
Mm-hmm.
so on. So be as descriptive as possible so that people can easily contribute to your project. And
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, you should design software systems with modular architecture, with a modular architecture in mind, making it extensible and making it easier to integrate with those systems, with those components, and
Mm-hmm.
be mindful of the compatibility of different open source licenses, and also
Mm-hmm.
incorporate security and privacy considerations from the outset of a project to prevent potential
Mm-hmm.
legal issues. And yep, so those are some of the recommendations. That basically a recap of what I mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so finally, what are your thoughts in the future outlook in terms of interoperability in open source?
Um, so I think interoperability is increasingly recognized by the
Mm-hmm.
open source community. So obviously there's a lot of awareness about this. So this will lead to a greater focus on collaboration, standardization,
Mm-hmm.
and best practices to make sure that there's seamless integration between software components and systems. And
Mm-hmm.
and as more open source projects adopt widely recognized standards and protocols, the overall level of interoperability across the ecosystem is likely to improve.
Mm-hmm.
And for example, like the open source identity and access management space has made significant strides towards standardization, although there's still room for improvement. Like for example, in the
Mm-hmm.
area, okay, so for access authentication and authorization, you get the standards like SAML, Open OAuth2, and OpenID Connect widely adopted. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but some standards, such as like SCIM, or System for
Mm-hmm.
Cross-Domain Identity Management, uh, which exists to address identity provisioning and management, they're not as universally adopted as those other standards. And same
Mm-hmm.
goes for like IAM solutions complying with standards like GDPR. So while the
Mm-hmm.
open source IAM space has adopted key standards and protocols and it's widely standardized, there may still be gaps and inconsistencies, which I think will like there will be room for improvement and people will be looking at adopting those standards as well widely.
Mm-hmm.
And also
Mm-hmm.
there's like advancements in API design and technology. So as API design methodologies and technologies evolve, continue to evolve, APIs will become even more consistent and user friendly, especially with like various API documentation standards. You can easily create client stubs, and I suppose those will improve and make it easier for people to use the product. So
Mm-hmm.
I think as any technology, interoperability as the aspect will also, evolve, and
Mm-hmm.
the community will continue to innovate and collaborate. Yeah.
That's true. Thank you so much, Dakshita, for dropping nuggets. I really learned a lot. I didn't know that interoperability touched this deep down. And yes, I've also learned like best practices when it comes to documentation, how important API design is, collaboration, how important it is, because sometimes people overlook that and say, oh no, but then at the end of the day you face these challenges later down on the road. So thank you so much for coming here and sharing your thoughts, and I'm sure even the community learned so much from you. I'm not sure, do we have any questions? Let me quickly check some questions here. While we don't have, since we don't have questions, so where can we find you? Where can we find work if someone wants to reach out to you? Okay. All right. We do have a question. So we have a question from Ace. It goes, a large number of open source projects can lead to fragmentation where different projects may have different priorities, goals, and standards, which can hinder interoperability efforts. What advice do you have for such cases?
Um, I suppose it all depends on how you communicate, and I think making sure that you communicate with those project owners and and see if certain like collaborative efforts are definitely going to uh, uh, play a big role. Like, for example, if you want a certain feature implemented and in another open source software, so one would be making sure that there is good collaboration to ensure that those features are implemented. But obviously, like I said, there are challenges when it comes to team sizes, like their
Mm-hmm.
priorities. They might be different, but if you can come up with ways to find a common benefits for these projects and see what the market demands, and if those can be communicated clearly, and if you can see that there are benefits for most people, then I suppose that is something that will be prioritized, and will be, you can make efforts to implementing such features. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so, like I said, it all depends on a project's priorities and their capacity and their roadmap, right? So we also have various users coming to us asking for different features. We try to see how that would benefit everyone. And if it's a feature that is commonly requested or frequently requested, then as a team, we would be making efforts to implement that, because that means it's a common request, and that would, if we support it, that would mean that there will be wider adoption. So I suppose doing enough research about how people are using this feature or how frequently it is requested would definitely help the project as well as the community. So, like I said, open communication will definitely help in such cases.
All right,
I hope
thank
that
you so
answers
much.
the question.
Yes, I hope Ace, your question has been answered. Do we have any more questions before we wrap up? Okay, we have another question. So, open source communities may be distributed geographically and culturally, creating communication barriers that can hinder interoperability efforts. This is this will cause a communication problem. Um, so,
Okay.
like, how do we tackle that? Yeah.
Um, I mean, these are challenges, but I don't think that they cannot be overcome. So there
Mm-hmm.
will be ways to communicate with, like, for example, maybe it can't be a verbal communication, but obviously with, lots of ways to communicate. For example, we communicate with contributors from China, from Japan,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, there are ways to do that. So uh, it imposes like some amount of or a certain extent of difficulty, but it is not something that cannot be overcome. That's what I think.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I hope that answers the question. I think we can wrap up. So, where do we find you, Dakshita? Where can everyone who wants like to further ask questions or reach out to you? Where can we reach you?
Yeah, you can. You're welcome. Is the creator. Yeah, you can reach me on LinkedIn or Twitter.
Mhm.
I'm at my handle is Teki Daki, and on LinkedIn you can find me under Dakshita Ratnaika, my name. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Dakshita, for coming in today. I think I will post Dakshita's socials on the chat. So we have LinkedIn, we have Twitter here, and let me quickly see if I have the LinkedIn. Mm, give me a sec. Yep. Oh God. Okay. Let me see.
Thanks.
Yes, got
Thank you for having
it.
me. Thanks for this.
Yes. All right, so you can reach out to Dakshita. We have her Twitter handle and their LinkedIn handle. And thank you so much for joining us today, Dakshita, and for taking time to come and teach us in this session. I learned so much, and I'm sure everybody has learned so much today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Bye.
Bye. Okay, that's it, folks. Thank you so much for joining in today. So, on our next section, we'll be discussing community health in open source. So, be sure to tune in on our socials and to see who will be our guest next time. And with that in mind, I will wrap up this call. See you next time. Bye.